Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Your Voice, Your Choice, a tutorial on how to create your Oregon Advanced Directive. So before we get started, if you don't already have a blank Advanced Directive form, please visit the link on your screen currently to download and print the Oregon Advanced Directive. And if this is your first time creating an advanced directive, we encourage you to think of the form as a worksheet. If you prefer, use a pencil or sticky notes to allow for mistakes or reconsiderations. And remember that once complete, it can be revised, revisited, renewed at any time. So don't be afraid to start your advanced directive, even if it means you have to revise or recreate it. You can do that at any point. And a good way to kind of break the ice is to get started by filling out the first section, section 1, which is about me. You can fill out your name and other details. Oh, also, if you have a healthcare representative in mind, if you don't know what that is, we'll explain it. But if you have someone in mind, invite them to view this presentation with you so that that can be a good beginning to one, hopefully, of many conversations that you'll have in this relationship. I'm Bob Daley. I'm the Advanced Care Planning Coordinator for PeaceHealth for the Oregon Network, and I'm trained in advanced care planning as a facilitator and instructor via Honoring Choices Pacific Northwest and Respecting Choices. And this is our advanced care planning website that you're welcome to visit at any time. We have lots of good information and resources there. Okay, for today, here's an overview of our topics. We're going to discover advanced care planning and why it's important. We'll have an opportunity to reflect on our values and beliefs, wishes, etc. We'll talk about the importance of selecting a healthcare representative and how best to do that. And then you'll have an opportunity to express your wishes in a legal document. And then we'll also talk about sharing and storing the document so that others can access it if there's ever a time when it's needed. So let's start with a little bit of an overview. What actually is advanced care planning? Well, advanced care planning is just what it sounds like. It's a process of thinking in advance about the care we would want if we had a medical condition, and who would speak for us if we could not speak for ourselves. It involves creating a plan, putting the plan in writing, and sharing it with those who have some investment in our care. The focus can be narrow, like it is today. We'll talk mostly about the advanced directive form, a little bit about POLST forms, because that often comes up as people are doing advanced care planning. But today's focus will be the advanced directive itself. But I hope our work today inspires planning in a number of related areas, such as aging in place, in-home care, supported living options, palliative care and hospice, body disposition, final arrangements. There are so many areas where we can specify our wishes and have a little bit of control over our experience if we do a little bit of planning. So I hope that doing your advanced directive inspires you to do more. So a brief explanation of the POLST form before we get to the advanced directive. POLST stands for Portable Order of Life-Sustaining Treatment. It's a medical order, the form is, and it must be signed by a provider. The form, basically, this is generalization, and probably applies to most forms, but in general, it asks if I were in a cardiac arrest and could not communicate, would I want CPR to be attempted, or would I not want CPR to be attended? And then further, if I needed care other than CPR and I were not able to direct my care, again, what kind of care would I want? And ours offers in Oregon offers 3 choices. Would I want comfort care, limited treatment, or full treatment? And a completed POLST is appropriate for those who are medically fragile or have a prognosis of approximately 1 to 2 years. So if you think a POLST is appropriate for your situation, reach out to your provider. It is a provider order. It has to be signed by the provider, and they could tell you more about whether or not it would be a good fit for your situation. Let's talk about the differences between an advanced directive and a POLST. In both cases, whatever form's being utilized will only be utilized if you're unable to guide your own care. If you're able to guide your own care, then that's what will be happening. But if you're unable to guide your own care, an advanced directive would be called into place. It should be, we encourage it to be filled out by anyone 18 years of age or older. And it allows for the assigning of a medical decision maker, also known as a healthcare representative or durable power of attorney for healthcare. That's a person who would make choices for you if you couldn't make choices for yourself about the kind of care you want. And the advanced directive in general asks, if in the future I fell into one of 4 very serious medical conditions, I would want, and then the choices are related to tube feeding and other life supports. This is for Oregon, obviously. Other states' advanced directives are different, slightly and some more substantially. The advanced directive is designed to communicate the principal's wishes. If it's your form, you are the principal, and it's designed to communicate your wishes to anyone invested in your care. It must have your signature or be be witnessed or notarized. And then it needs to be signed by the healthcare representative, verifying that they are accepting that role. And as we talked about, the POLST is different in that it's for those who are medically fragile and only have a 1 to 2 year prognosis. Ask the questions, basically, if today I was found in cardiac arrest by EMS, I would want CPR attempted or not. If I didn't need CPR, but I needed additional care, I would want comfort, focused care, limited treatment, or full treatment. It's designed as a communication tool from the provider, your provider, to emergency medical services, stating your wishes. It's a medical order, and it must be signed by a doctor or provider, I should say. Okay, before we get a little further into Oregon's advanced directive, I should point out that there is a single form that's specified in Oregon law, but that single form can be wrapped or branded in a number of different ways, depending on who's funding the form. And the most basic version, the one I pointed to at the beginning of this presentation, is the one you see on the left here, and that's the one we'll be using today. The exact same content is in these other forms as well. And so if you have one of these other forms, as long as it's from 2019, you should be using the most recent form that was updated in 2019, then you can use that and just follow along by section number as opposed to page number. This presentation refers to page numbers also, but if you're using one of the 2 forms on the right, or the form on the right and the form in the middle, then follow along by section number. And another note, the form in the middle, the last section with the blue edged pages is where you'll find the this basic advanced directive form. The rest of the Oregon Health Decisions pamphlet is more like worksheet. So you'll find the advanced directive form in the last section of that booklet with the blue edged pages. Okay, let's step back a minute and think about this form. I like to think about it in 3 main parts. The first part is the about me and about my healthcare representative and alternates part, and that's sections 1 and 2. The second part is the healthcare directive part, also sometimes known as the living will, and that's where I can document specific instructions about the kind of care I would or I would not want, and in our case, in 4 specific medical situations or circumstances. That's section 3 and 4. And then the last section is the signature and witnessing section. And there's also the place for the healthcare representative to sign that they are accepting this role. And those are sections 5, 6, and 7. I hope that breaking it down this way makes it much easier to navigate and less intimidating. That's kind of the whole point of a presentation like this, is to make filling out the form much more doable, less intimidating, more accessible. And I hope kind of separating it into sections like that is valuable in that way. And then there are three questions that we encourage each principal to think about in creating the advanced directive that fits them, and that will guide your planning in general. If you were ever in a time where you couldn't, in thinking about if you were ever in a time where you couldn't speak for yourself and needed medical care. So the first question to be considering, if you haven't already, is who do you want your healthcare representative to be? We'll explore each of these questions a little bit more in a further slide. The second question is, what should that person know about you? What beliefs or values do you have that would be helpful in guiding your care that they should know about? And thirdly, specifically, what type of care would match those values or beliefs if you weren't able to speak for yourself? So the first question there, choosing a healthcare representative. What qualities should a healthcare representative have? And so these four qualities come to mind. First, they should agree to be your healthcare representative. And I know that seems obvious, but this is a role that we would never want to surprise a person by. And so writing down a person's name without talking to them is a significant disservice to them, much less to you. So please make sure you've spoken with your healthcare representative, hopefully had multiple conversations with them about this role, and that they are willing. They should be able to make decisions in stressful and emotionally challenging situations. They should be willing to follow your wishes, even if your wishes are not what they would choose for themselves. They should be an advocate for you and your wishes. And then they should feel prepared based on conversations with you to direct your care through challenging medical events. We like to share what happens if we don't have a healthcare representative, because that can be impactful and actually motivating for people to fill out an advance directive. There is what's called a surrogate decision-maker hierarchy, and that is the list of people you see on the slide here. And this is written into state law as well. And it's a hierarchy, so it starts from the top. If they can find a person in the top slot, that's who will be making your decisions. So a guardian appointed by the state would be the top slot. That's a pretty specific circumstance. And then the next slot would be your healthcare representative. So if a guardian's never been appointed to you, then it would be your healthcare representative. After that, if you don't have either of those, then they keep going down this list. Next in line is your spouse or registered domestic partner. Note, even if you're separated, that person could be your decision maker, whether you want them to be or not. Of course, if you're divorced, they're not your spouse, and if you're divorced, then they wouldn't be choosing for you. But if you're separated, then they would be in this slot. Next would be an adult designated by others on this list without objection by anyone on the list. And then next in line would be your adult children, your parents, your adult siblings, an adult relative or close friend, and then lastly would be an attending physician. And you'll notice under adult children and adult siblings, there's an asterisk. And if you go to the note by the asterisk, it says adult children and siblings, majority rule, but judicial recourse is not addressed. So they have not specified how to navigate if a majority can't be attained. And so if you think this through a little bit, there are a few places here where there could be significant disagreements about your care by the people in this hierarchy. And one of the reasons to fill out an advance directive is to minimize the opportunity for disagreements at an already very, very stressful time. So we encourage you, if you're on the fence about filling out an advance directive, to at least consider filling out this first part, which is the assigning of a healthcare representative, for the reasons that this hierarchy points to. Okay, the second question was, what should my healthcare representative know about me to help them fulfill this role? So we've got a few questions that hopefully will act as prompts in your conversation with your healthcare representative, and then a few sort of quotes that you could fill in the blanks that might be hopefully will be helpful as well. So the first prompt is, what level of engagement with others is important to you? What activities are important? And a quote or fill in the blank might be, for me, a good day means, or what I value most in life is. Another prompt would be, what spiritual beliefs or cultural practices do I have that would impact my care? And quotes for that prompt would be, I'm strengthened by, I am comforted by, I feel connected when. Another prompt would be, what are the most basic elements of your life that you would not want to live without? So for me, again in quotes, the minimal acceptable outcome of tube feeding or other life support would be this or thus. And then the final prompt, it may be helpful to think of an experience you've had with someone who couldn't speak for themselves but needed care, and just evaluating, in your opinion, strictly in your opinion, what went well for them, what didn't go so well. It might be a grandma, an aunt, a parent, a sibling, someone you knew who needed care and couldn't speak for themselves. What went well for them in that situation, and what didn't go so well, in your opinion? And mostly, what did you learn about what your wishes would be if you were experiencing something similar? What did you learn from their experience? So I want to be clear. I'm going to back up to this slide for a second. None of these questions or quotes are on the advanced directive form. What we're hoping that they will function as a guideline or roadmap for the healthcare representative. So none of the prompts are on the form itself, but care decisions are often not as black and white as the options provided on the form. We'll fill those ones out, but lots of care decisions are not as black and white as what is on the form. So the goal is, in these conversations, for our healthcare representative or decision maker to know what you value in life and why you value the things that you do. And with that information, they'll be better equipped to guide your care when circumstances don't fit in the clearly defined categories. I hope that makes sense. And these conversations can be challenging to engage in, but the vast majority of people that I've worked with who have engaged with their healthcare representatives about these conversations have found that it was very fulfilling. By the vast majority, very fulfilling, and most felt relieved afterwards. So it's highly encouraged. So if you have your form, if you've downloaded the form and printed it out, whatever form you have, you can follow along again by following along in these sections here. I'm going to pull my notes up as well as you're doing that. Yeah, and I won't read the form to you because you have it in front of you. You can read it word for word, but I will summarize a little bit. And we can just start with this sort of preface, the first half of page 1, or the section before section 1 that doesn't have a section number. And what it's talking about, quickly to summarize, that you'll have an opportunity on this form to designate a healthcare representative to express your values and beliefs related to healthcare decisions. It notes that the most recent advanced directive replaces all others. So if you fill one out, have it witnessed, have your signature on it witnessed or notarized, and have the healthcare representative sign it, then it becomes the valid advanced directive. To be an effective form, it does need all those components. If it includes instructions, they also know if it includes instructions to discontinue treatment in any way, it can be revoked at any time in any way that you communicate revocation. And in all other cases, revocation is possible as long as you're capable of making medical decisions. And then sections 1 and 2 are probably hopefully the easiest ones to fill out. The first one would be your contact information, and then section two is your healthcare representative. If you've been able to identify one, the primary healthcare representative would, their contact information, the relationship to you, et cetera, would be specified in this first space here. We'll continue to page 2 or section 2, continued. And it's continued just so you can choose or specify 2 other healthcare representatives, a first and a second alternate. And we do encourage that you have at least a first alternate in case for some reason anyone looking for your healthcare representative can get a hold of an alternate if they can't reach the first healthcare or your primary healthcare representative. So if you can identify a second person, that's wonderful. A third is even better if you're able to do that, but at least a primary and a first alternative is what we encourage. Section 3, instructions to my healthcare representative. So section 3 actually refers to the, it refers to the healthcare instructions you are about to give in section 4. And the choices section 3 offers are, to the extent appropriate, my healthcare representative must follow these coming instructions in section 4. That's the first line that you could initial, or you could initial, my instructions or guidelines for my healthcare representative to consider when making decisions about my care. So you can specify, are your instructions to be followed as quickly or strictly as possible, or are they simply guidelines for the healthcare representative? And then the third line is, if you have other instructions that you want to specify in this short space provided, you're welcome to do that. You can initial there saying these are your additional other instructions. They don't provide a lot of space for other instructions here. As you see, it's about 6 or 7 inches or something. And so there is another way to add additional instructions, and we'll talk about that when we get to that section. Okay, and then section 4. This first part of section 4 on this page has a few definitions for the coming instructions, including one that I'll point out, and that's that you'll receive care for comfort and cleanliness no matter what other choices you specify in this form. So in filling out your advance directive, please do assume that care for comfort and cleanliness will be provided regardless of anything in this form. That should be a basic basis of care. Let's see, and then a few more definitions. And then section 4A is a way to include all of your wishes that they offer in this form in one place. And I would say only initial this line if you are sure that you want neither tube feeding, you don't want tube feeding, and you don't want any other life support. In the 4 medical circumstances that follow, then you can sign or initial this line in 4A stating, I do not want my life to be prolonged by life support. I also don't want tube feeding as life support. I want my healthcare provider to allow me to die naturally if my healthcare provider and another knowledgeable healthcare provider confirm I am in any of the medical conditions listed below. So if you feel that strongly, you can initial this line and put a diagonal line through all the sections here, making it clear that you're foregoing any other choices about these 4 medical conditions. But if you do not want to initial that line in 4A, then you can put a line through that paragraph stating that you did not agree with that statement, and you're going to specify the type of care you want in these other 4 situations. So we're moving on now to 4B, additional instructions regarding end-of-life care. And I'm going to back up a little bit and point out the 4, if I can get my highlighter tool working here. I'm going to point out these 4 circumstances. So the 4 medical conditions are if I'm close to death, if I'm permanently unconscious, if I have advanced progressive illness, or if I'm in extraordinary suffering. Those are the 4 medical conditions that this form asks you to respond about, and they're all very significant medical conditions. So close to death, permanently unconscious, if I have advanced progressive illness. And I'd like to point out for this one, actually before I do that, I'm going to say that with all 4 conditions, the form offers 3 choices regarding tube feeding and 3 choices regarding any other life support. And the choices are the same in each category. So you'll see the repetition of the choices about tube feeding and about life support in each of the 4 categories. And I'll just read what they say here under close to death. If I was close to death and life support would only postpone the moment of my death, I can initial one of these choices regarding tube feeding. I want to receive tube feeding. I want tube feeding only as my healthcare provider recommends, or I do not want tube feeding. And then similarly, regarding life support, under the same section, if I'm close to death, I want any I want any other life support that may apply. I want life support only as my healthcare provider recommends, or I do not want life support. And so you can fill out your responses regarding tube feeding and any other life support that may apply in each of these medical circumstances. Moving on to page 4, I want to point out what it says about advanced progressive illness. Just to point out that they're talking about a very advanced state of the illness. If I have advanced progressive illness that will be fatal and is in an advanced stage, and I am consistently and permanently unable to communicate by any means, swallow food and water safely, care for myself and recognize my family and other people, and it is very unlikely that my condition will substantially improve. So we're talking about a very significantly advanced progressive illness. And extraordinary suffering is the 4th category. Someone asked for an example of that, and an RN gave me an example that I thought was probably the closest one I had heard thus far, and that's, you might call to mind somebody who was very severely burned, and tube feeding or life support would only continue their suffering, might be able to keep them alive, but continue to keep them in permanent pain. Permanent and severe pain is how this is worded. Okay, so you might take a few minutes here to talk about those or think about those decisions if you haven't initialed your choices already. And then when you come back, if you do pause, we'll talk about this section 4C, additional instructions. So with these additional instructions, this is a pretty small, unassuming section, but there's a lot that can be added here, and I wanted to mention that for a second. Especially in terms of if I believed I was close to death, or if it was believed that I was in medical circumstances that put me near my death, near my end of life. There isn't another place on this form, and there aren't too many other places in our culture where we could specify to those that care about us what our wishes would be if we were close to death. And so this little section C allows you to add an addendum of your own creating that can be handwritten or typed with your, should be signed and dated and notarized or witnessed along with this form as a part of this form. But it can contain so much valuable information about you if you are interested in recording that information. If I were close to death, I might consider where I wanted to be at that time and might make note about that. Or I might consider who I wanted around me or what rituals or cultural practices, spiritual practices I would want happening around me. I might specify what type of music comforted me, or what sort of scents comforted me, or what lighting I found to be comforting. So all of those things could be specified in this additional instructions section as an addendum. And I would just highly encourage engagement in that part of this form, because that's what really, if you have the time and energy and interest, because that's the part of this document that makes it a very, very personal document. And I think could be such a relief to those who were caring for us if we were ever in that state, to know what our wishes would be so specifically. Okay, enough said about that. The next section is section 5. So if you have made it to here with me, then you've done the hard emotional part. Section 5, we're on section 5, section 6, and section 7, that's signatures and witnessing. So give yourself a pat on the back for getting this far. Section 5, you can sign it, but the preference is not to sign it until you are with your either notary. I'm moving on to section 6, witnessing. You can have it either notarized or witnessed by 2 witnesses. So it's an either or choice. You can have it notarized, and notaries are usually available at your bank or a shipping office. Sometimes medical buildings have them. You would have to ask. In all cases during COVID-19, I would call first, make sure that a notary is on staff and available, and they may have you make an appointment so you come in at a very specific time. But it can also be witnessed, and it's equally as valid if it's witnessed by 2 witnesses. The witnesses cannot be, they cannot be your healthcare representative, and they cannot be your attending healthcare provider. And the witnesses, the notary would provide their signature and a stamp. Witnesses would provide their signature and the date along with their printed name. And the witnesses are attesting in both cases to your identity, that you are who you say you are, and that you are signing this form without being under any duress. And that's section 6. You would sign in front of them. They would sign that they've witnessed your signature and that you're who you say you are, making these choices freely. And then section 7 is to have your healthcare representative sign here saying they have accepted the role of healthcare representative. You'll notice it does say signature or other verification of acceptance. Sometimes a healthcare representative is remote. They may live in another state. That's entirely okay, but it does present some complications with the form. So it is okay to handwrite in here the person's name, and where it says signature or other verification, you could write in acceptance verified via phone call of this day at this time, and then your initials and date. It could also be see included email for verification or something along those lines. So providing their signature or some form of verification. And the next page is simply the same for the first alternate and second alternate healthcare representative. So hopefully that helps in filling out this form, this little tutorial. There are a couple more slides, but remember, if you get stuck at any point, visit our website. And you can contact a ACP coordinator at the website if you get stuck at some part of this form and need help in order to complete it. We want to make it as easy, I don't know if it's ever easy, but as doable as possible. Okay, next steps. If you haven't filled out your form today, your next step would be to decide who will be your healthcare representative if you haven't yet, and complete the advanced directive form, have a conversation with them, obviously, and then complete the advanced directive form, sign the document, have it witnessed or notarized, have the healthcare representative sign, and then we recommend making multiple copies of the document. We're on step 5 here. Keep the original, that's yours. You should always have a copy of it. Give copies to your healthcare representative so that they have record of what your choices would be, and any others who you think would show up at your bedside if you were significantly ill, because those are the people who would have an opinion about what your wishes would be, probably. So they should have notice of you specifying your wishes if you're doing that. Also, make sure your primary care provider receives a copy and ask that it be scanned into your medical, electronic medical record so that it's available at every point of contact in your medical system. If your local hospital is not in the same medical system as your, or healthcare system as your primary care provider, you can fax or mail a copy to be on file with your local system. A lot of hospital systems will do that. And we do at PeaceHealth, and here's the mailing address and fax number. And that's in case if you were in a car accident or something like that, the hospital that you would go to, that's what you want to be thinking about. Which hospital would I be delivered to if I were unconscious, say after a car accident, and make sure they have record of this information too, if they're not with your main healthcare agency. And then for PeaceHealth, you can call the number provided in step 9 here to ask to check and make sure your document made it into your advance directive, and that it's on, or your advance directive made it into your electronic medical record, that it's on file and all's well. One of the things we strongly recommend is that you put your name and date of birth on each page of the document when you send it or fax it, because it's not usual, but it is possible that the pages of the document would get separated, and it's very difficult, other than sections 1 and 5, to know whose document this is if you've received a page, if you find a page doesn't have one of those sections on it. So please make sure you put your name and date of birth on every page of the document. Okay, and then we recommend what are called the 6 Ds to continue the conversation and remember to review the document. Our choices might be different over the years, and in some circumstances, the chances of us having different wishes may be increased. So those are the 6 Ds. And so every decade, we should check our document, review it at least. If we're divorced, we should check our document and make sure the people who are assigned on our document are the people we want assigned. If we receive a new significant medical diagnosis, that often prompts review of an advance directive. And if we experience a decline in our health status. And then it says death here. We're referring to the death of one of the people assigned on the document as well. Often when somebody close to us, very close, a trusted friend or companion or partner, spouse dies, this would be something that's easy to forget, but that person, because they were so close to us, might also be a healthcare decision maker for us. And so we would want to review and reassign those roles if that's the case. And then distance, as I think I mentioned, it is okay for a healthcare representative to be remote to where we are. But if we move or one of our healthcare representatives moves, it's at least worth reviewing the document and whether or not it's, and really the conversation, is that person still willing to perform the role of a healthcare representative. So those are the 6 Ds to continue the conversation and review the document. And that's it for this presentation. We hope it was helpful. Thank you for viewing. Remember that additional instructions can be found on our website here. And there's also contact information. You can contact a coordinator if you need help with any or support with any of this. Thanks for viewing and following along in this and for doing this important work. Wish you the best.